joint event organized by the Union of European Federalists and the World Federalist Movement. All this interesting debate we will have about global economic development. It's an initiative of Guido Montani, Professor Guido Montani. I would like to thank him again. I don't like to spend time present him because everybody knows in the Federalist Network all the excellent initiatives taken. I don't know how many years, decades now, from Guido Montani, and the many books he has already published regarding global federalism and global economic issues. So it's a pleasure to have the coordination and to moderate this discussion. I'm Daphne Gogou. I'm a Greek lawyer living in Brussels, specialized on human rights and migration. We will have the pleasure to have with us two eminent professors of economics. I will try to present briefly, but before, I would like to mention that it's a big honor to have with us this evening the presidents of the European Federalist Movement, a former member of the European Parliament, Domènec Devesa. Hi, Domènec. And of course, a pleasure to have with us the chairperson of the board of the World Federalist Movement. We have set a joint transnational group past November in order to structure the cooperation between European and World Federalists. We have set an ambitious agenda for this year. We work closely in order to deliver results because the current global challenges are big, so we need to coordinate efforts and have a constructive exchange of ideas and initiatives in order to promote the world democratic governance and federalism. Saying that, allow me, before giving the floor to Domènec, to mention briefly a few elements concerning our main speakers, starting with a lady, Antara Haldar. She is professor of law and economics in Cambridge. Her efforts cover issues, her initiatives and research cover issues of development, the bridge also between development of the societies in general. She's also judge in the business school. So it's a pleasure to have her with us and share her views about this topic. We have also Professor Fabio Masini from Rome. He is professor of international political economy. It's in Rome 3 and also chair of Jean Monnet. He's also an expert on issues concerning economics, but focus on global governance, multilateral governance, development, and active citizenship. And he's also the Secretary General of Robert Triffin International. So I think it's really a very challenging topic. Why we need now a new Bretton Woods, and how to proceed in more concrete terms. What are the steps to start working in a more constructive way? And I will start with you, Domènec. Please take the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daphne, for the support to this event that you have also provided as a member of the board of UEF in charge of relations with the World Federalist Movement, and of course also to Guido Montani, because as it has been mentioned by Daphne, it was Guido who, a number of months ago, I think at the end of 2024, proposed to have the joint working group between UEF and the World Federalist Movement on global governance. And I think this working group and this event today focused on the new Bretton Woods couldn't be more timely, right? I think, and of course, as UEF and myself as president of UEF, I have always made a priority to work on global governance and to strengthen the cooperation with the World Federalist Movement, because as a Federalist, we are convinced that we have to work in the different levels of governance, from the local to the global. And also, of course, in this, in line with this idea, the UEF is a member of the World Federalist Movement. So I'm very glad that we have been able to set up this working group, and that with this event, we are already starting to carry out this joint work. And I was saying that it couldn't be more timely, because even if our commitment is ideological to the question of global governance, I will say that, and that, of course, we recognize that the management of the global public goods requires a supranational federalistic approach to be able to have a democratic and efficient management of these public goods. But I think the point is even more driven home since the election of Trump, because up until the return of Trump to the White House, we kind of taken for granted that we lived, obviously, in an imperfect international system, because it is not based on true global governance of the kind that we advocate. But we had an hegemonic power that was underpinning this international system, imperfect. This hegemonic power, with many faults, as we know, Vietnam War, Iraq War, other instances, but more or less it had of course I'm referring to the US, it had the heart in the right place. It was a democratic, liberal power. In its foreign policy, it was not only driven by crude national interest, so it saw a benefit of underpinning this international system, international law to various extent, the international monetary system, the UN system, the World Trade Organization, etc. Now, when you see the election of Trump, or the re-election of Trump, then it looks like the 30-year period that goes from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the Trump re-election is more like an illusion in the history of international relations, because you have now a very aggressive multipolarity, Putin, Xi Jinping, Trump. But on top of that, you have that the hegemonic power is not behaving anymore as a benevolent hegemonic power, right? So for Trump, underpinning the international system is not really important. On the contrary, he wants to actively undermine key tenets of the international system. He is ready to just follow in a very raw way what he perceives to be in the US national interest, no matter what. Pure transactionalism, no allegiance, probably more on the contrary, to international law. And even it is also, I think, in question the the long-term democratic and liberal character of the US, because as you know, he's actively undermining the rule of law in the US, attacking freedom of speech, university, the freedoms of the universities, deporting people without due process, trying to undermine habeas corpus, using executive orders to undermine laws approved by Congress. So all this shows that our original idea that an international system cannot work if it doesn't have a federal governance, I think it's even more clear, because we cannot base the international system on an hegemonic power, even whether it's one or two or three, one hegemonic and maybe two or three competing, because you're going to have the issues of balance of power that lead to wars, to conflicts, or you're going to have an hegemonic power that may not always, as we have seen, be willing to act in a benevolent way to the rest of the world and to sustain the international system. Now, going more into the topic of today, which is the new Bretton Woods, that's very interesting because, again, it shows the defects of basing the international monetary system on a national currency, which is the dollar, the US dollar. And interestingly, this is something that, to some extent, bothers Trump and some of his advisors, because, of course, the current system is based on the US as de facto the global reserve currency, but it is not issued by an international organization, but it is issued by a nation state. And of course, is also a tool of its foreign policy, is a tool of its national interest, and also, of course, the main decisions taken by the Federal Reserve and by the federal government are in terms of the needs of the domestic economy. And of course, whatever the consequences or the effects are for the rest of the world are of a secondary consideration. I'm not saying they are not taken into account, but obviously it cannot be the primary goal. It has to be to serve their national economy. That's number one. And of course, you remember very well that unfortunately Keynes failed in Bretton Woods because he proposed Bancor. And Bancor was precisely a global currency issued by the International Monetary Fund. What are the advantages for the US of this global role for the dollar? Well, if you remember, de Gaulle called that the exorbitant privilege, because since your reserve, your currency is accepted by everyone, then you can finance yourself very cheaply, because your public debt denominated in dollars is accepted by everyone. So you can really have very cheap financing. You can attract capital from other parts of the world, so foreign investment into your economy, because all these holdings in US debt have to be directed somewhere, and also because in the end there is going to be this interest for foreigners to hold US denominated assets, dollar denominated assets. But of course, the interesting thing is there are not only advantages, there are also important disadvantages, which is that this is going to make your currency overvalued, because it's going to push up the value of your currency when everyone wants to hold US dollars. And that, of course, on the one hand, by the way, another advantage that I forgot, if you need to import energy, that's going to be very convenient, because you are going to purchase cheaply your energy imports. But of course, you're going to have your exports are going to be more expensive and less competitive. And this is something that Trump has identified as a key issue, and he considers that the deindustrialization process, the loss of manufacturers in the US in favor of Asia and China in particular, is at least partly due to the strong dollar effect. And this is also the opinion of Stephen Miran, who is the chief of the Council of Economic Advisors. Interestingly, it's not the opinion of the Secretary of the Treasury, who continues to say that they want to keep the safe asset character of the dollar and US treasuries. But this is, I think, an important point, because it shows that whoever is ready to provide the global currency as a nation state is going to have this difficulty. It is going to have to balance costs and benefits, and certainly the cost of making in this global economy your exports more expensive. It's really an important cost that has to be taken into account. And of course, as Guido Montani has said in a recent article in Social Europe, if we were to have a global currency that is pegged, or better said, all national currencies or regional currencies like the euro are pegged at a fixed exchange rate to the global currency, then this global currency is used for international trade, then you don't have this kind of problems. So you have a level playing field for international trade, and this will be, again, the ideal solution that Keynes had already envisaged when he proposed Bancor. So this is a cautionary tale. With this, I conclude. Also, for those that would like to have the euro to replace the dollar, I'm in favor, of course, to take, in a way, also the opportunity of the current Trump policy in the United States to strengthen the role of the euro in the global economy. But I will not advocate the same solution, because it's as with the dollar, because, as I said, it's faulty. We need to envision a system with a global currency, and also because we don't want to have a strong euro policy that damages our exports. So we in everything we do to improve the role of the euro as a safe asset, or as an alternative reserve currency to the dollar, we need to take that into account. We don't want to overplay our hand, I will say, in that regard. Of course, there are also a number of things that have to be done if we want to have the euro playing a reserve currency, an enhanced reserve currency role. You need to issue euro bonds, because if you don't have EU-denominated or euro-denominated debt, not only by member states but by the EU itself, you are not going to be able to play the role of safe asset. But this, in turn, and this is interesting, and it is not so much said in the current debate, you are going to need to have European taxes, because you cannot continue to have Eurobond issuances. Imagine now one after COVID, the one we did for the COVID recovery, one for European defense, and continue not agreeing to the common, the EU own resources that you need to pay this debt back. And this was, I think, a big mistake we did with the COVID recovery plan because we agreed to issue debt, but we didn't agree how to pay it back. And to this day, 5 years later, we still have not decided. So I think another issuance of euro bonds that will be good for the global role of the euro, like the digital euro, which is still pending to be resolved, to be agreed. Then if we don't agree to the EU taxes, I don't think these bond issuances will be sufficiently attractive or credible to investors. So in the medium, in the short term, I think we should aim at a multipolar system, like in a transition phase, before we get political agreement to the global currency issued by the IMF. We will, which by the way, there was another proposal at that time also, which goes in the same direction as Guido by Soros about 25 years ago, who proposed to use the special drawing rights of the IMF as a global currency. So it's really not that difficult. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to do it. But before getting to that, which will require political process, we should establish a multipolar system as advocated by Pisani-Ferry, in which you will have three currencies: the dollar, the euro, and the renminbi. So the three currencies of the three major economies in the world, and sharing collectively the burden of being a reserve currency. And the burden, I already explained what it is. So this system as a transition to the global currency based on before the Bancor and now the special drawing rights. So this is my contribution to the debate. And thanks again very much for all the experts that are participating. And I'm looking forward for your comments. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Domènec, for this rich introduction. So I will give now the floor to John Vlasto, asking him to be a little more laconic in order to have also the time for having the expert, the speakers contribution, and Guido's also introductory remark and debate between us.
Of course, I can reassure everyone that I am not an expert on the topic at hand, so I will be brief. So my name is John Vlasto. I chair the World Federalist Movement. On behalf of the World Federalist Movement, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. And in particular, I'd really like to thank the European Federalists and Guido and Daphne for taking the lead in organizing this event. So thank you very much. Now, I know that Guido is going to be introducing the European Federalists and the World Federalists and our collaboration, so I'm going to leave that to him. The catalyst for today's meeting was an article by Dr. Antara Haldar, where she expressed World Federalist views, but she didn't mention the World Federalist Movement. So naturally, we were piqued and reached out, and here we are. And Antara, I look forward to exploring the potential for collaboration going forwards. And then finally, just by way of a provocation for our upcoming discussion, I know that the description for this event talks of a world order based on multilateral governance, as if that might be something we want. Well, it's maybe a question of timing, but as a world federalist, I'm not at all sure that multilateralism is what I want. 193 sovereign nations negotiating lowest common denominator compromises in defense of narrow national interest is not a decision-making process that is serving the common interest of humanity. What we really need is a deliberative and legislative world parliament, which one might argue is the antithesis of multilateralism. Anyway, I will leave you with that thought, and Daphne, back to you.
Many thanks, John, to be so brief. And I promise to have a second webinar, I hope very soon, on the existing proposal for the World Parliament. I know that we have very good background information to go ahead for this idea. And why not to have very soon another webinar focus on this issue. But now I give the floor to Guido Montani. Please, Guido, the floor is yours for the introductory remarks about the subject and all our cooperation.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Domènec, Devesa, and John Vlasto for their introduction and welcoming. And I read my brief introduction, which consists in clarifying the reasons justifying the debate between European and World Federalists. Why is this joint work necessary? The existence of two federalist organizations, one European and the other worldwide, depends on the different motivation behind their creation. Both were founded as a consequence of the Second World War, but the motivation of the founders are different. In Europe, the cultural and moral basis for the birth of the movement for the creation of the United States of Europe was Hitler's brutal aggression against the other European peoples. According to Hitler, I quote, "The aim of our struggle must be to create a unified Europe. Only the Germans can really organize Europe. Thereafter, the way toward domination is practically certain. To dominate Europe will be to assume the leadership of the world." End of quotation. To oppose Hitler project, opponents spontaneously arose in all European countries. The European resistance is the foundation of the movement for a federal unification of Europe. The case of world federalism is different, which arose as a moral reaction after the explosion of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World federalism had as its primary goal the abolition of nuclear weapons, war, and the creation of a federal, just, and peaceful international order. The different motivation behind this birth of the two movements also explain the difference between the strategies of the two organizations. The European Federalists acted as a citizens' movement for the creation of a European Federation. The Schuman Declaration of 1950 proposed the European Coal and Steel Community as the first step towards the European Federation. On the contrary, World Federalists focus on the reform of the United Nations, an association of states whose charter proposes to save future generations from the scourge of war, but did not provide for any evolution toward a world federation. The United Nations was governed by the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War prevented any attempt at federal reform of the United Nations, and today the struggle between great power is further weakening it. This short description of the birth of the two movements is sufficient to understand why, for half a century, they have followed separate and independent paths. What to do in a situation of growing international anarchy? The European Union exists, albeit only as an economic power, because it lacks its own defense and a federal government, while at a world level after the end of the Cold War, a struggle has been unleashed between big and small powers for world supremacy. The United Nations is in crisis, and the European Union is still unable, after pacifying the European nation, to take responsibility for foreign policy that has its crucial objective the creation of a new, just, and peaceful international order. That is the issue under discussion at this meeting. A cultural and political dialogue between European and world federalists is necessary to identify a common political objective. Without a common strategy, the Federalists will not found either the European or the World Federation. I will stop here.
Many thanks, Guido, for this introductory remark. And I think it's extremely useful. And it will be, of course, if you agree, we can share with all our, let's say, participants and also the members of the European and the World Federalist Movement. Because it's really important to see how we work, in particular how we can share experience and develop common policy objective for a better global governance, for a more democratic and justice global governance. This is really one of the issues. And of course, I will give now the floor to Professor Haldar. Hoping we are listening with big interest in your intervention. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daphne. And thank you, Guido. Thank you so much for setting the context. Thank you so much for catalyzing this conversation. And thank you also for drawing me into this fascinating set of communities. So I'm going to begin with a confession. When I wrote, so I've been writing a monthly syndicated column for Project Syndicate for about 3 or 4 years now. And when I wrote that piece, the piece that John so kindly said sort of prompted this meeting, I did it with terror in my heart because I felt like I was articulating this view that I could no longer sort of hold in, but that I felt would be received with in a tepid way, let's say, you know, at the most by readers. I was really overwhelmed by the response that the piece received. So there's good news, there's hope for us. But particularly gratifying was when Guido reached out to me and brought the work of these two organizations to my attention. So, you know, it's a particular pleasure to be talking to this joint meeting of the European Union of European Federalists and the World Federalist Movement. And so to your point, John, I was aware of the historical context of this movement, you know, and the Montreal Declaration, but I was extremely buoyed to see that the cause and the organization remains alive and kicking, and would be delighted to explore collaborations and conversations going forward. So it really is a true delight to be here. So what I'm going to try and do, and I'm going to try and sort of keep my comments as brief as possible so that we have lots of time for debate, is to sort of link the fascinating introductory sort of remarks that we've heard. And in a sense, I think that the very essential technical issues that Domènec was pointing us to, and I know that Fabio will be building on those themes, is impossible to have. I mean, it's impossible to have that conversation without reflecting on the themes that John brought up. So I think the current malaise that we find ourselves in is an 80-year print of global economic integration without institutional integration and global governance structures that are able to embed that. So, you know, it's sort of like the horse has bolted and we don't have any guardrails. I'm sorry, mixing my metaphors here, to sort of rein this creature in. And so I'm going to take a slightly sort of broader view of this. And the analogy that I'm sort of going to use to frame this is to paraphrase the American essayist Henry Thoreau and urge us to ask ourselves that as we build what people keep telling us are these castles in the air, this notion that world government, world federalism, a new planetary paradigm, there are sort of various phrases that I think nod at the same kinds of reforms or you know, revolutions maybe that we're looking at. What we really need to think forensically about is how those castles can have their foundations in the ground. And particularly, I mean, looking at it through my disciplinary lens, behaviorally. So I think, I mean, if I know that I'm not alone in this, in many other gatherings or groups, I would spend my 15 or 20 minutes trying to persuade you of the desirability of this new paradigm, of these new governance structures. It's a tremendous relief to be speaking to an audience where that's not the sell that I have to sort of you know, make, or that's not the thing that I have to persuade you of. Very, very clearly, as has already been alluded to in this conversation, we are stuck trying to use 20th century institutions, and that to watered down, dialed down 20th century institutions, because Keynes was sort of outmaneuvered at Bretton Woods, you know, 81 years ago, to address 21st century problems. What we are grappling with, the enormity of the challenges posed by climate change, the enormity of challenges posed by runaway pandemics, one that we lived through as recently as 5 years ago and are now suffering from sort of collective amnesia on, the pace at which technology is changing, and the days of containing the internet are sort of innocent compared to what we're coming up against in the age of AI and on the cusp of AGI. Space travel, oceans, biodiversity loss, and of course, economic phenomena like financial contagion of 2008, which was the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, which is what Keynes was trying to remedy, to supply chain breakdowns as a result of things like the global pandemic. So this change is needed. It's urgent. I think Domènec did a wonderful job of persuading us of how much more acute that urgency is since November of last year, and even more since January of this year. So I think we're all on the same page as far as that is concerned. So what I'm going to focus on is what I see as the core problems to scaling, to the, you know, to scaling our institutions to the planetary level that are so acutely required, right? And I think the core of the problem is a psychological one. It is a cognitive and an affective one. The human brain is in many ways designed for small group trust. The primatologist and anthropologist Robin Dunbar has done a lot of work establishing that we're optimized to deal with groups of a maximum size of 150. And even there, the sort of concentric circles of trust as it radiates out starts to become weaker and weaker. So on the one hand, we have these brains that are geared towards small group interactions, that are designed for personalistic ties and personalistic trust. But our problems are of an entirely different scale. Right. So tribalism in that sense is emotionally and affectively and cognitively real. And we need to sort of overcome this and both acknowledge this and overcome this in the institutional structures that we start to build. In the Project Syndicate piece, I refer to Tim Morton's work, and he has labeled these planetary scale problems as hyper objects, that they operate on on a dimension and on a scale that requires an altogether different level of cognitive leap from what we're accustomed to. I think a lot of us here are economists, and so, you know, to use a term of art, as the scale of groups grow, there are information asymmetries that sort of are built into our interactions. Dishonesty is less easily exposed than in small groups, and also principal agent problems creep in, right? Those that delegate the power and those that wield the power become more and more distant from each other. So voters and their political representatives, for instance. So what we're caught in is these core psychological dilemmas of institutionalization. We need to address, and we need to sort of find the right multi-scalarity in order to be able to set this up in a way that is both credible and feasible. The English legal philosopher H.L.A. Hart talks about this in his seminal treatise, The Concept of Law, where when one makes the progression from what he calls primitive institutions, small group institutions, to a higher scale of institution, endemic to that process is alienation. And this, I think, is what we're confronting in a lot of our national governments, even, where and is the sort of fount of populism. And this is something that we're going to have to sort of confront very seriously as we try and eke out the blueprint for these castles that we want to build. So when you go from informal norms to law and contracts, there is a loss of trust. When you go from even reputation-based mechanisms, which is what the algorithms use, they become vulnerable to bias and gaming. In the Weberian bureaucracies that are procedure-based, there can be rigidity and slowness and alienation sort of emanating from that. And even in the most sort of advanced technological solutions where trust is disintermediated, like blockchain and smart contracts, it's not overcoming the trust problem, it's just sort of refocusing it. Which is to say that as we try to build this castle, for me, this thing that cements it is trust. And that is what we need to confront as we try and seize this moment of using the vacuum that we have in global leadership to build these new structures that are so urgently needed. Okay, so that's the bad news. But what is the good news? The good news is that what congeals communities, as Harari has written about, as Ara Norenzain at the University of British Columbia has written about, as many people have articulated now, is the use of myth, symbol, ritual, narrative. Right? So we need a new story. We need a narrative of the new sphere, as it were. Okay, so we need a new global narrative. There are various competing articulations for what this might be. It could be global peace. It could be shared humanity. It could be climate survival. But it's essential for us to put our heads together to work out what the most compelling account of this narrative could be. The second point that I want to make is that these institutions, I think, have to be a fundamentally different proposition from the institutions that we've had in the last 80 years, in the sense that I do not think that they can be institutions based on the cost-benefit rubrics of neoclassical economics anymore. I think that they need to be institutions that engage what psychologists call the moral machinery of agents. They need to be embedded in a kind of global morality that philosophers like Peter Singer and Anthony Appiah and others have already started to articulate the beginnings of. The next bit of good news is that I think that there are quite a lot of empirical examples out there of what these polycentric global institutions might look like. So, and they're as widespread as things like the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is the sort of infrastructure of the global internet, involving a wide variety of stakeholders in orchestrating this essentially global institution. In the climate domain, the Montreal Protocol protocol was very successful in eliciting global cooperation around CFCs and the hole in the ozone layer. The Paris Agreement has been a kind of success. It was the only global climate treaty that had unanimous, that was signed by every country on the planet, until of course Donald Trump withdrew the US from it, his first act on the day that he was inaugurated. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision provides a kind of template, the Antarctic Treaty System. So the point is that there are institutions out there that we can sort of draw inspiration from, even at a quite granular level of what the architecture of these new global institutions should look like. And finally, the nation state itself provides inspiration. From Italy to India, these are not organic entities that emanate from some kind of preordained logic. They've been created by human hand and through the creation of narrative and ritual, and myth and the sort of congealing of shared experience into all of that. And so I think acknowledging that the nation state is both new. I mean, many of the states in the world, nation states in the world, are as young or old as the Montreal Declaration. I mean, they're sort of the same vintage, as it were, but also failed. Benedict Anderson refers to the nation state as an imagined community, and this is, I think, our cue to imagine better ones. Right. So we need to make, for reasons, for a variety of governance reasons and for a variety of financial and economic reasons, we need to make the pivot from hegemony and a world order based on hegemony to a polycentricism based on genuine plurality and morality. And there is no better example out there of supranational federation than the European Union, which is, of course, not a flawless institution. And I think its main flaw is that it is more of an economic union than it is a governance union and a social union in a deeper sense. And the fissures that were exposed during the Greek financial crisis, during the era in which austerity was imposed, that I think had a huge part to play in leading in many ways to the Brexit vote. There are things to be remedied, but it provides us with an example of the fact that nations that were warring till a few months before can actually be congealed into a functional economic, political, and social entity, although there is more, and so this gives us the arsenal to start think about decentering the narrative of state sovereignty and to start thinking about accounts of spatial and temporal multiscalarity that is simultaneously more global and more local. So it sort of goes both up and down, the scale. So Hannah Arendt, when in The Human Condition, talks about the planet as the stage for the human, and that very stage now is wobbling. Which is a huge challenge, but also an opportunity and one that we must seize. Part of what we need to rethink is certainly the notion of the common currency. My sense is that a pivot from the dollar to the euro or a pre-existing currency, or even really the SDRs, will not be sufficient. What we need is something more like a digital bank, or perhaps, I've been thinking of what we might christen it, and perhaps something like the tally that invokes something that is universal, but also goes back to the relational aspects of economies that were more embedded. But as we contemplate the future for what Carl Sagan called our pale blue dot, we need to navigate between the choppy waters of alienation and balkanization and strive for a cooperative world order that is based on justice that is not only procedural, but also poetic. So I look forward very much to the debate and hearing your thoughts on this and exchanging notes on how we can strive for such a world order. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Haldar, for this extremely rich and very well structured intervention. So you identify the core problem. You call us for develop a global narrative, peace, humanity, climate change. I will add justice. And you call also for a different approach for the current global institution. And this is really a key element, that we don't have to try to go for small changes, but we need a completely different approach in the way that we develop the global institution, reference to the morality, to the plurality. You mentioned also the Paris Agreement, and you referred to the European integration as a regional model. As a Greek lawyer, let me say that during the austerity period and the crisis, we identify also the limit of this integration, as the European Court of Justice mentioned that she was not competent about social cuts. And this is really the need to go further for us as European, for having a more strong integration. And for this reason, as European Federalists, our main objective is a treaty change. And we work closely with the European Parliament in order to reopen and to put this debate as the first priority for the coming period. Now I give the floor to Professor Masini. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to Guido and Daphne for organizing this webinar, and for, of course, the presence of both the UEF and World Federalist Movement. Well, okay, we are living in an unprecedented era of international disorder, as everybody has already underlined, which provides both risks, huge risks and opportunities. I agree with Antara that the main problem of this disorder comes from an interdependence, growing in the interdependence that was left to increase without providing the structure of the governance infrastructures to manage that kind of interdependence. And we are now coming to leave the contradictions of that kind of problem. We come from 4 major shocks in the last 5 years. You all know that the COVID-19, which upset the global value chains, upon which we were relying for our usual day-to-day life. Then we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine and new conflict in the Middle East, in Africa, and so on. We had the resurgence of inflation, which is not to be underestimated, because we were not experiencing that kind of thing since at least 15 years. And then, of course, we had Trump, which is a major shock in the global economy. It is, and it was actually an unprecedented era of international disorder. But as you are probably aware, this kind of term, international disorder, was very much fashionable also 20, 30, and even 40 years ago. I think the first time it was written, international monetary disorder was in the 1980s. So this story comes from an accumulation of contradictions, of problems that increased during time, that are now coming to a critical point. If we want to cut the story short, because I would not come back to Keynes and White plan in Bretton Woods, I would point at the 1997 crisis in East Asia, because can you hear me? Because I was deactivated by someone. Anyway, so I was talking about the 1997 crisis, because that is relevant to our story even today. Because what happened in that period was that there was the East Asian currency crisis, and the US response with the IMF, with the complacency of the IMF, was to frustrate the Japanese proposal for an Asian monetary fund, so to a regional solution to that problem. And instead, they preferred to let the IMF come in with its conditionality and all what came after. So the domino effect could spread and accumulate. Why I'm referring to this crisis? Because the aftermath of the crisis, and remember that in that same period, there were the negotiation between the United States, basically, and China for the entrance of China into the WTO. So the China entering into the WTO, increasing growth. I mean, the growth rate of China skyrocketed in a way. And this was accumulated in reserves. Why? Because they needed to cushion, let's say, potential outflows of capital, sudden outflows of capital. And so this means that global imbalance is accumulated because, of course, every country was accumulating the export-led growth money in T-bonds denominated in dollars, which caused the excess saving of the world financing the expenditure of the United States, which is something perverse if you think about that. So even the low-income countries are still financing the expenditure, investment, and consumption of the United States through this mechanism of the dollar-denominated safe asset and the need to accumulate reserves. So there's a paradox which is going on at least since 25 years. It was even before, but in the last 25 years, it's increased quite a lot, which was only sustainable because of the credibility, in a way, the legitimacy or the recognized authority of the United States as the global hegemon and the dollar as the global safe asset. In the moment in which this delicate credibility is in trouble, is in question, is put under doubt, of course, the situation changes. And this is exactly what we are living right now. Well, we know that the second step, let's say, is the crisis of 2008, 2009, because in that case, there was a big financial crisis originated in the hegemonic country, in the United States, which had a domino effect in the rest of the world. And so that was the moment in which there were several calls for a Bretton Woods II, based on the idea of overcoming the Triffin dilemma. You might remember the Xiaochuan Zhu, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but the governor of the popular bank, the Central Bank of China, called for the overcoming of the Triffin dilemma and for the establishment of an international currency based on SDRs, because in that moment, the only perspective, the only multilateral and multi-currency asset was and is actually, for the moment, the SDR. That attempt at creating a new international monetary order was again frustrated by the USA. We should say that with the complacency of all the G7 countries, because remember that it was the G20 that tried to put forward on the agenda the idea of a Bretton Woods II, and it was the G7 that said no thanks. So again, there was a specific decision of the United States to keep on their exorbitant privilege, although Miran calls it the exorbitant onus in a way, but that's still an exorbitant privilege. That is the process which led to the construction, to the building, to the establishment of the BRICS around the emerging power, both economic and political military power of China, and to the multilateralization of the Chiang Mai Initiative. Don't forget that experiment, which is relevant because it gives the idea that something at the regional level can be done, and it's very effective because in the last 25 years, nobody has attempted any longer to attack those kind of currencies in the Southeast Asia area. So the idea is that we are entering, or we have entered already, in a bipolar world from the economic point of view. I know that from a political military point of view, of course, there is still Russia, but Russia is probably just one of the instruments in the game between the two real superpowers, economic superpowers, because Russia, as you know, has the same GDP as Spain, more or less. So it's not really a superpower from the economic point of view. But of course, it's still there, it's important, but it plays a different role on a different level. So we are heading towards a new bipolar confrontation between two blocks, the G7 blocks under the hegemony of the United States and the BRICS bloc under the hegemony of China. And this is very risky. It is very risky, especially now, because as was already underlined by many of you, and especially by Antara in the last, in the previous intervention, we badly need global public goods. And there is an increasing demand also from the public at large, not just from specialists, experts, or this kind of thing, but also from the public at large. Remember the Fridays for Future. Basically, that was a call on global institutions to solve the problem of collective action at the global level, to solve the problem of the struggle against climate change and this kind of things. So we are in a bipolar world, and we need to restore some kind of multilateralism. I don't know how to call it elsewhere, John, but this kind of thing, a not hegemonic and not bipolar world. This is basically my point. How to organize this is another problem, and it's much more complicated, but certainly not a hegemonic and not a bipolar world. So I think that, first of all, Antara is very much right. We need, first of all, a different narrative. Because remember that especially in those, I mean, in this period in which social media are so important and information narratives are spread all over the world in real time, if you don't have an effective narrative, you can be very smart, you can have wonderful ideas, but you will not get anywhere. So you are perfectly right. We should work much more on this. I have here narrative economics, Robert Schiller, of course, you know it. And it's crucial also to come back on that kind of how to build a narrative, to build our narrative against the narrative of the sovereignty or no global, because there are two narratives which are both very dangerous, the no global narrative and the sovereignty first, so Italy first, the USA first, England first, and so on. So how to build a new perspective, let's say. I don't have any special recipe for this, but multipolarism based on regionalism. My personal idea is to come back on the old, let's say, tradition of the Federalist culture, in which the idea was to build regional integrations, strengthen regional integrations, and then to have regional representatives at the global level. Of course, I know that there are major problems to advance on this, because maybe only Europe is something that we can more or less call a pole. The other poles are not there, but still I'm convinced that we can try to make something as federalists to strengthen regional integration in Latin America, Latin and Central America, in Africa, because they have now the free trade area, and that might be strengthened, for example, with a safety net, a regional safety net, which might unite the different sub-regional existing safety net in different parts of Africa and other initiatives. The other one is the Chiang Mai initiative, which might be strengthened and might become another important pole around China and so on. So multipolarism based on regionalism. The increasing attention to global public goods. I mean, this is something on which we should invest our communication, our academic research, inquiries, and production of narratives. And then there is the point about the SDRs, of course, because, I mean, still now they are the only multi-currency asset existing in the world, and they are issued by a global institution. So why not trying to invest a little bit more? As you probably are aware of, I wrote a paper in which I suggested European countries to pull together their SDRs, which we don't need, and invest them into a multilateral development bank to channel them to Africa for a joint development plan between Africa and the European Union. That might be something which might be even further upscaled and rethought and have pressures, political pressures for advocacy in favor of this kind of initiatives that link development and this kind of currency of money. Let me just say that in the long run perspectives, I also think that the IMF should sooner or later become the true lender of last resort. And maybe with the World Bank the consumer of last resort. Because don't forget that when you have a crisis, you don't just need a lender of last resort, which has been played in the case of the 2008-09 crisis by the Fed through the swap lines activated with the ECB and with the Japanese bank, and also indirectly to the others. So it was the Fed who played the lender of last resort, and the federal government of the United States who played the consumer of last resort to kickstart recovery again after the crisis. So we now need something similar again at the international level. Maybe a lender of last resort might be a matter for the IMF, maybe with the regional structure of the IMF, in which you have the regional first aid, let's say, intervention, and then you have the global one. And then you must have the consumer of last resort, which might be the World Bank or whatever else, which invests on global public goods, which kickstarts recovery investing in global public goods. This is something, is a multi-layered idea of the global governance that I think might help somehow to go, let's say, at least in the right direction. Let me add two very quick observations. The first is the role of Europe. Strengthening the international law, the external role of the euro, I agree with Domènec. That's not the solution, but I also agree with him when he say, well, but that goes at least in the right direction, because you show at least that there are alternatives to the dominance of the safe asset denominated in dollars. So you can have safe asset denominated in euros, and then maybe you can have sooner or later safe asset denominated in renminbi, maybe in the long run. But this is very interesting because having an external role of the euro implies, as Lagarde said yesterday or the day before yesterday, I cannot remember now, to have, first of all, to issue euro-denominated safe asset, which means debt in a way. And of course, you have to have the problem of how to finance that debt. So you have to think about own resource, genuine own resources, not what the treaties say about own resources, which basically is the national contribution. But this requires also a deeper and liquid, as Lagarde said, capital market, which brings us to greater integration in Europe. So, and I'm coming to the last observation. This brings to the overcoming of the, I wouldn't say historical problem, let's say, but I would say that many times we have had the problem of the prioritization issue between world federalists and European federalists. European federalists claiming that Europe first, because otherwise you will not have a global federation, a world federation. And world federalists sometimes claiming, no, if you go on alone in Europe and the framework is backward, I mean, it's not sustainable, doesn't make sense. We have the same struggle. We are now facing the same struggle. We are now facing the same challenges, and we have a window of opportunity to go on in the same direction. I think we should exploit that at best. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Professor Masini. It's really extremely rich, your contribution, and it's make also the bridge between comments formulated by Domènec and Antara before. And of course, the new element, you mentioned narrative, you referred about the need of global public goods. This is a big challenge for all of us, and the experience of the COVID gave us really a clear picture that we need to consider in a completely different way. We have to really refresh our views, how to proceed in order to provide solution to new crises. The climate change, of course, the biodiversity threats, they are really global issues for which we need to consider in a completely different way. I'm very happy also that you referred more in details concerning the regional dimension and the role we can play as European federalists, but also how we have to promote regional integration, in particular in other continents. So you refer to Latin America and Africa. Latin America, they there are different groups, but of course, it's extremely limited and there is no really trust to go for a deeper integration. So I think we have a lot of issues to discuss. I open the floor for questions for the participants. Who will take the floor? Dora, please start. Please present yourself and then just formulate your question and ask the participants to give an answer, or the panel.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for having us today. My name is Dora Bender. I'm from Israel, and I have my colleague Eunice from Palestine, and we're building the Democracy and Federalism Hub. Because as you know, we are in a conflict area, and I want to mention that the model of the EU is actually a model that a lot of our plan writers that they write about a federal solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they are using. So they are using your narrative in a way, and I think it's really lovely. So I wanted to ask, because you mentioned many things, and I want to ask some new things that are happening globally. For example, the power shift. If our leaders today were our true leaders, and the lobby behind them weren't in the spotlight, we saw that with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. There you are. You have somebody that have wealth, instead of supporting behind the scene, is actually supporting in front. So this is something that is really unique, and it's going to be shifted as we're seeing it. The second thing I wanted to mention is AI. Artificial intelligence is something very significant to our life today, and we are there is benefit of using it, and we see that, but there is also concerns. So if you have, how do you see it? And the last thing I wanted to ask about a new narrative that we also promote in a civil democracy. And we feel that narrative and that story can actually have an opportunity to bring balance in power. So I would like to hear about that too, if possible. Okay, thank you.
Many thanks, Dora. I think this is a very sensitive issue, what happened now, and your efforts locally to promote a kind of federation. It's really extremely ambitious, but extremely important now. So another question, of course, we will share with all the video after the event. Who would like to take the floor and ask something? Francesco, please. And then Roberto Castaldi. First, Francesco, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy about this discussion. Also because it's funny, because I had as a professor. My professor, the Professor Masini, so it's like a surprise. Here we go again, and also about these matters. And my question that I'm thinking about from several times. I'm an economist too, and study economy, and I'm actually doing a master in Istao. For the records, my name is Francesco Leon, and even if technically I'm with the AWS, which is a left party, progressive party in Italy, as a member of Europa Verde, I'm also a student of economics, and I also pro-Europe, pro-Federation, and so I'm very interested about these matters. And the question that I want to make is about the possibility that sometimes about the competition with China, with BRICS, is that if it is possible about the importance of currencies and their role, if it is realistic that the two major currencies, which are euro and dollars, it is possible to create a common currency united, a sort of euro-dollar, to face and to to face the China, the renminbi rise, and if it could be useful to increase cooperation and economics, also about the face-off between a multipolarism world, but to avoid also hegemonic. So try to, if it could be a way to go to the direction of multilateralism, even in economics. So I wanted to make a question about this. Thank you.
Many thanks. I think we will take one question more, and then I will give the floor to the speakers to reply. Roberto Castaldi, the president, the Secretary General of the Italian section.
Yes, thank you, Daphne. Thank you, everybody, for the great debate. I'd just like to point out a political proposal linking some of the things that have been raised in the debate regarding the linkage between the Federalist struggle in Europe and at the world level. Because the United States are basically giving up the leadership at world level regarding the production of global public goods. And the monetary aspect is one of those within the international economic order. The other one are related to financial stability and development, with initially the threat the United States could leave the IMF and the World Bank, and then the speech by the Secretary of Treasury or the American Secretary for Treasury that they will not leave the IMF and the World Bank, but they asked them to change policy radically by abandoning any contrast to climate change, asking them to invest in fossil fuel, abandoning pro-diversity policy, good governance, and all these woke policy that the IMF and the World Bank have been supporting according to the Trump administration. Now, I guess that this will bring the world to a clash between the rest of the world and the United States. And the European Union should decide to merge the quotas of its member state in the IMF and the World Bank, because this would make the EU the single largest shareholder in both organizations. Because the United States today are the largest shareholder with 16%, the second one is Japan with 6%, but the EU as such would be 25% of the share of both the IMF and the World Bank. This way, taking the lead, ensuring the continuity of the policies of the IMF and World Bank with regards to the contrast of climate change, the abandonment of fossil fuel, the pro-diversity and good governance policies, and also stepping up as a potential leader regarding these important global public goods, and this paving the way also to the reform of this organization, because in our view, the EU should use this strength and power within this organization to promote the reform in order to give space for the new powers. Because one of the elements why there is so much discontent and challenge to the current order is that many states feel that they are not represented in a global institution in the way they should. These institutions were based on the balance of power on 1945. In 1945, the United States were 50% of the world GDP. In 1973, the G7 was 50% of the world GDP. Now the G7 is 30% and the BRICS are 32% of the GDP. But their role within both the IMF and World Bank and other international economic institutions is much lower. So the EU should use this role to propose a reform that gives a place on the table to all the emerging powers, so that we can create a really multilateral and cooperative international economic order based on a renewed IMF and World Bank. And this would also place the EU in a good situation to use the euro not as an alternative hegemon currency to the dollar, but again to have a new system, a cooperative system with a reform special drawing rights in the IMF that can help deal with the monetary issue that you have been discussed so far. So I think that we should take into account the monetary sphere together with the other economic aspects linked to development and to financial stability, because these are essentially the public goods that the world needs. And I think that there is room for a cooperation between European Federalists and World Federalists in these regards, as the EU is probably the only actor that can have leverage to promote this kind of reform. Thank you.
Many thanks, Roberto. It's really a very concrete proposal, and we hope we will have the opportunity in June when we will have the federal committee, the UEF Federal Committee meeting to discuss a little between us and see a little more in details how we can proceed with this idea. Before giving the floor to Guido, I would like to give the floor to Jean-Marie. If you would like to explain to us what you have put as a question in the chat.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My point is that beside all financial aspect of a currency like the dollar is, I think it's also a lever for the issuing country, here for the USA, to impose rules to the rest of the world, extraterritorial rules. And I think here, for example, of Antara or such rules, since all the actors of the international trade need more or less to have something being done in the USA, for example, in stock exchange or just in banks, and therefore are exposed to the US law and exposed to, let's say, retaliation is perhaps a bad word, but I think of that, if they do not comply with the extraterritorial rules of the USA. And therefore, my question is, first, do you think that that point is right? Because perhaps I'm wrong. If this point is right, is it a reason for the EU, perhaps, as a first step to establish the euro as such an international reserve currency? Or perhaps that's even a reason to say, no, we don't want to have any nation or group of nation alone being issuing such a currency. We need something else on the world level. So this is my question. Thank you.
Many thanks, Guido. Would you like just to take the floor and also give your reply to the question raised by Jean-Marie, and then we will ask all the speakers to reply or to make another comment.
Yes, I raised my hand in order to raise a slight different question concerning the relationship between the European Union and the creation of a new economic order. Because I think that there is a trend today in the international political order, which is very dangerous, which is the rise of expenses for what the government, national government, consider a public goods, which is defense. So there is a continuous increasing in defense spending, especially in Europe, but also in other countries like China, India, and so on. So that is very dangerous, because if you increase continuously the expenses in armaments, a war becomes easier, even a global war. And the other effect is that in order to increase defense expenses in armament, you have to reduce expenses in welfare, school, health, and so on. So the proposal for a new economic order, economic international order, is very important because it can reduce this trend and perhaps change all the international politics in a new direction. I think that the European Union especially should take into consideration, but that is very difficult for the European Union because the European Union until now consider foreign policy only and enlargement, but not the creation of a new international order. But the European Union should take into consideration the possibility of the alliance with the BRICS countries. Of course, you have already China and Russia among the BRICS countries, but you have also India and Brazil, and all this kind of country should they ask for a new role in the, for instance, the Security Council and so on. So they are a possible allied for a reform with the support of the European Union, because the euro is very important as an international money. So the alliance between Europe and the BRICS country also has the meaning of changing the relationship between rich industrialized countries and developing countries. So that is a point we should discuss a lot, much more in our next meeting, because I think that in order to have something appealing for the reform of the international monetary system, the possibility to show that that is important in order also for the development of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and so on, is crucial. Take the first example is the rate of interest, because a poor country can issue money, issue debt with a very high interest rate compared with the United States, Europe, and so on. So that is just an aid to development. But there is also some other consideration to do about that. What I think, as European and World Federalist, I think you should develop and to think about this kind of strategy. Many thanks in any case for all your question and debate.
Many thanks, Guido, for this excellent remark. And personally, I share completely your views. But let's see also the realities in Europe, in particular after the Russian aggression to Ukraine, and the all let's say chaotic situation and the war in Europe, and the opening of Pandora's box with the question of borders and how to maintain the current situation and not change the border. This was really one of the acquis at the European level for years. So we are now facing a completely different situation. So I give the floor to the speakers if they would like to formulate another comments. Please, Younes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daphne. I have two questions. Well, first of all, I'm Younes. I'm from Ramallah in Palestine, the West Bank. I'm working on the Palestinian Democracy and Federalism Hub. This has been very, very interesting. So I am grateful to be here today. I have two questions regarding everything that I've heard so far. How beneficial would it be for Europe right now in the current circumstances where the shift is turning and the spotlight is on Europe right now to take up what America has left off, unfortunately, for now? Would it be beneficial for Europe to open its trade with the Middle East, with our countries in the Middle East, not just within Europe itself, but like also with us? And the second question is, does cryptocurrency have a serious future in the EU? Is it a problem for the euro? Thank you.
Many thanks. I let also the speakers to reply, and Domènec, if you would like to formulate some comments on this. Antara, would you like to just provide a kind of reflection or reply to Eunice's question?
Thank you, Daphne. Yeah, I mean, fascinating conversation, fascinating discussion, and fantastic questions. I just want to identify a theme that seems to be emerging, which is a debate about how new the new Bretton Woods needs to be. Right? Is it a question of, I mean, are the IMF and the World Bank, are the sort of remnants of the old Bretton Woods redeemable? Fabio's given us some great suggestions. I really found Roberto's suggestions very interesting in terms of how European Federalists and World Federalists can join forces and, in a sense, hijack the sort of skeleton of the World Bank and IMF, and not only protect it from the sort of American agenda, but really turn it into almost something different. And that, I think, is a really interesting proposal. Just from observing, how it's played out in the preceding decades, and observing the Washington Consensus play out in various parts of the world and have wildly distortionary effects, I'm somewhat skeptical. I worry that if we try to just minimally reform, if it isn't really radical reform, I feel like minimal reform may not go far enough. Russia has essentially undermined international law completely through its membership of the Security Council. The reason why the original Bretton Woods didn't work was because of the hegemonic role that White played in those negotiations and undermining it. So I think I think it's an open question, but I think it's something that we need to reflect on. How new is new in the context of this discussion? I'm leaning fairly radical, but I've heard some really interesting proposals here for how reform can verge on revolution. So thank you for that. A lot to mull over.
Many thanks, Antara. And Fabio, would you like to share your views?
Yeah, sure, Daphne. Well, I would like to very briefly try to answer to each question, or at least I will pick up most of them, let's say. Leadership. Well, we know that in the Federalist tradition and thought, we have the idea that you can change things when you have a crisis, an initiative, and a leadership. We have many crises. We have many potential initiatives, although we should focus on the most important, of course. In that case, we should prioritize between different initiatives. What we do not have currently is leadership, or at least a recognized leadership, at least at the global level. But I would come back here on the Antara's point that the narrative is crucial. Because nowadays, through the narrative, through the correct narrative, if we ever manage to find one with right slogans and very easy and efficient and effective ones, we might even become, the society at large, civil society organization, might even become the leaders in some of these struggles. Second point, artificial intelligence. I think it should become a sort of global public good. At least ruling a couple of things concerning artificial intelligence, how to make it an asset for the global development instead of a risk to the global development. I think this should be a global public good. Of course, it's difficult. But that might be another point in which we may try some struggle, political struggle, advocacy campaign, let's say, not maybe a political struggle, but an advocacy campaign. Francesco, a common currency between the United States and Europe, I don't think it would make sense for several reasons, which I can explain to you on another occasion, maybe privately, but I wouldn't really suggest to go on that direction. Roberto, well, I know that you are very much in favor of this idea. It's also one of the things that you wrote in proposing my sub-session in the Federalist group agenda, let's say, that you want me to lead in Italy. I'm very, very skeptical about that. Really very skeptical about just uniting and thinking that uniting the quotas, you can have the 25%, because it doesn't work like that. You have to negotiate it. I mean, it's still now being negotiated, the reform of the quotas in the IMF and World Bank, because it's the same thing basically. Since 2016, well, actually since 2014, implemented in 2016, they are still going on talking about how to reform again those quotas since 10 years ago, and they are at nuts. I mean, I was last time in the IMF annual meeting, and they were still discussing, and I mean, that's a political issue. We cannot pretend that you just aggregate the numbers of the shares of the U27 and find out that you have the 25% of the quotas, and that you would come, and that the IMF in that case would come to Europe, because that's the other point. Because remember that the articles of agreement state that the IMF and World Bank are settled in the place of the country in which there are the most shares, which might even become China or the European Union, no longer the United States. So that's a huge political issue. So that requires a different, let's say, discussion, a longer discussion, different plans B, C, D, and so on and so forth. Jean-Marie, you are right. You're definitely right. This is one of the reasons why, for example, the BRICS have their own. They established their own infrastructures for payments. You know, it's just established. They've just been implemented 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I cannot remember now. The transnational payment based on the renminbi. So they want to have an alternative infrastructure for payments and for assistance, reciprocal assistance, and so on and so forth. But do we need now one in euro? I doubt that. I don't think we need now another one, because we have the SWIFT, we have the BRICS with the transnational payments. And do you want one more? Maybe we should even think, maybe should better think about the interoperability of this kind of infrastructures. And this is the point in which I reply to Youssef, the role of the cryptocurrency. I don't know if they have a future, but this is one of the open discussions about the cryptocurrencies, because if we have cryptocurrencies which are based on infrastructure which are interoperable between one another, that may help also the multilateralization of the international monetary and financial system. Guido, Guido, there are several layers in which I can reply to you. And of course, we can talk privately about those different layers, but I will choose only one. I agree that Europe should be in a way, not thinking about how to reimagine, redesign its alliances. So India, great. Brazil is a potential ally, great. BRICS, and even Russia, because, I mean, we shouldn't forget that sooner or later that conflict will have to come to an end, and we will have Russia here at our borders. So how do we want to establish new relationship with the post-Putin or post-war Russia? We have to think about that. So I think we should be very likeable. I don't know how to say it in English, but I mean, not be rigid in thinking that we are stick to the alliance, to the old alliances. So I think you're right from this point of view. And of course, it would be very nice to have the values of the European Union, traditional values of the European Union, peace, democracy, and so on and so forth, brought upscaled, let's say, at the global level. It won't be very easy, but you're right in a way that we should struggle towards that end. I hope I replied to most of
many thanks for your reply, Fabio. And many thanks to all, starting with Guido Montani, who was the inspiration of having this exchange. And I don't know if Domènec would like to say a few words, but I would like to reaffirm that we have a long discussion 2 days ago in our EB meeting, Executive Bureau at the European level, and we clearly, with the support of the President, Domènec, we clearly say that there is no way to perceive deepening the European integration without developing a strong link with the international federalist movement. That's, I can say that it's clearly confirmed a few days ago, and this was a reply to some comments formulated for some colleagues. I can share, Domènec, with all the participants that there is not a dilemma on this, because we have to go in parallel, and this, I think, it took us time as European to understand this, but the current situation, it's really, it's the framework, it's really important for us to understand that we cannot really focus on exclusively issues related with the European integration without having the global picture, and the global picture is also the global development of democracy and federalism and a different kind of governance. So I don't know if Domènec would like to have a few words before we close the meeting, the event.
Well, yes, Daphne. Of course, many thanks to all the participants, both the panelists and the normal participants that have contributed to the debate. I think there are many points of convergence, no, in the idea that we need to design a new world governance system, in fact, and as part of it, of course, we have tackled as World Federalist Movement and UEF some elements of this world governance that has to be more federal, more supranational, to be effective in decision making. John Vlasto said it before in his introduction, that is democratic or has democratic legitimacy, that is not only intergovernmental. We have been defending for a long time the creation of the UN Parliamentary Assembly. We should continue to advocate for that. The reform of the UN Charter, that, as you know, it had a clause for revision 10 years after its entering into force, which was not respected. So since 1955, that is a pending obligation, in fact, of the international community. And of course, the Global Green Deal is also an important element. And the global justice, Daphne, you're very much aware of that, the support to the ICC, to have more member states join the ICC, and what we could tackle today, the new Bretton Woods. And there we have important points of convergence, I think, on the need to have to move away from the dollar as a global reserve currency. Of course, then there are many issues and technicalities, whether we go for a multipolar multi-currency system, how to have SDRs to play a bigger role. I found very interesting, of course, Fabio's ideas that I support of strengthening regionalism, regional blocs as the main players of global governance. I think something that is missing a bit in the geopolitical discussion at the moment is that, of course, you have a world of empires emerging, no? Russia, China, but also Trump's US, no? Even more as an empire than before, no? And how do you build an alternative to that is the alliance of regional organizations, the EU, Mercosur, the African Union, ASEAN. This is, and of course, BRICS is also part of that to some extent. So this is, of course, the alternative that we can also put forward. I'm also very glad this has been emphasized by Daphne, of course, of the strengthening of our cooperation as World Federalist Movement and UEF. I'm also very glad that we had here today also the colleagues Dora and Younes from the Federal Forum Israel-Palestine, because of course we as UEF have recently approved a resolution in which we said many things about the conflict, but also that the solution in the end will have to be a federation of the Holy Land, encompassing the two national communities. So I think we can also strengthen our cooperation in this direction. And yeah, thanks, Daphne, for your comments. I have been always convinced in the UEF that this was our duty. And already at the time of Sandro as president, we made progress in the cooperation. And now I think we continue in this direction. So thanks once again to the panelists, to Antara Haldar, very stimulating ideas, new ideas about cognitive tribalism that I was not aware that we have to, of course, take into account, and then the need for new narratives. Fabio, Masini's, I already mentioned the important contributions. Guido, Daphne, for your drive in organizing the event, and of course, thanks to all the participants.
And many thanks to all of you, and of course, starting with the speakers. And last point, we will continue a long discussion on multilateralism just before the Federal Committee meeting in June. So Friday, 20th of June, in the afternoon, we will continue the discussion with all these topics, including the financial and economic dimension of multilateralism. So you are all welcome to join the discussion if you are in Brussels or online. Have a nice evening, and we will share the video with all Federalist friends, European and global. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.